Deep within the halls of Byrgenwerth, upon a balcony overlooking a moonlit lake, sits an old man in a rocking chair. He does not speak. He cannot speak. When you approach him, he simply raises one trembling hand and points toward the water, toward something beneath its surface. Fungal growths sprout from the back of his neck, like some terrible garden. His blood runs a strange silver white, no longer the crimson of humanity. This is Master Willem, Provost of Byrgenwerth, and his story is one of the most fascinating tragedies in all of Bloodborne. A tale of ambition and enlightenment, of terrible discoveries and even more terrible consequences, of a man who sought to elevate humanity to the plane of gods, and may have succeeded in ways he never intended. Master Willem was not always the decrepit figure we encounter in the game. There was a time when Byrgenwerth stood as a beacon of learning, when its halls echoed with scholarly discourse, when knowledge seekers from across the land came to study under the tutelage of its renowned provost. Willem was the head of this prestigious institution, a position that speaks to his intellect and the respect he commanded among his peers. As provost, he guided the college's pursuits, shaped its philosophy, and personally mentored some of the most significant figures in Bloodborne's lore. Byrgenwerth was not simply a school. It was a research institution dedicated to history, archaeology, and perhaps most importantly, the pursuit of truth. Under Willem's leadership, the college studied all forms of learning that might allow humanity to comprehend and perhaps achieve a higher plane of existence through science, astrology, and archaeology. The college even constructed a lunarium, a specialized observatory, to study the moon and the night sky, suggesting that Willem and his scholars understood that answers might lie beyond the terrestrial world. This interest in celestial bodies would prove prophetic in ways they could not have imagined. Willem was not content with surface-level understanding. He was disillusioned by the limits of human intellect, frustrated by the boundaries of mortal comprehension. This dissatisfaction would drive every decision he made, every expedition he authorized, every terrible discovery that followed. The name Byrgenwerth itself carries meaning. In Old English, Byrgen can mean burial site, grave, tomb, or sepulchre, while worth can mean dear, suitable, or worth. The name could be interpreted as suitable grave, dear tomb, or worthy sepulchre, a fitting designation for an institution that would send its scholars into ancient burial grounds in search of forbidden knowledge. The discovery that changed everything came when Byrgenwerth's scholars found a vast labyrinth beneath the school itself. This was the Pthumerian Labyrinth, a sprawling network of tombs carved out by the Pthumerians, a superhuman race of beings said to have unlocked the wisdom of the Eldritch Truth long before humanity even understood such concepts existed. The Pthumerians had been dead for untold centuries, their civilization reduced to ruins, and their descendants twisted into monstrous guardians of their ancient halls. But what they left behind would reshape the entire world. Willem, recognizing the significance of this discovery, authorized expeditions into the depths. He sent tomb prospectors, brave or foolish souls willing to descend into darkness, to unearth the secrets buried beneath. These expeditions were not simple archaeological digs. The prospectors faced ancient horrors, reanimated corpses controlled by necromantic bell-ringing women, perpetually burning watchdogs that somehow still lived, and creatures that defied all understanding. Yet they persevered, driven by Willem's vision and their own thirst for knowledge. From these expeditions came two discoveries that would prove monumentally important. First, they discovered the old blood, described as a holy medium found deep within the tomb of the gods. This blood did not coagulate, remaining fluid in ways that ordinary blood did not. It possessed remarkable properties, including the ability to heal diseases thought incurable. The second discovery was proof of the Great Ones themselves, beings that might be described as gods, entities existing on higher planes of reality that humanity could scarcely comprehend. These were not benevolent deities watching over mankind with loving care. They were alien, incomprehensible, operating according to logics and desires that human minds struggled to grasp. The Great Ones became an obsession for Willem and his scholars, beings representing everything they aspired to understand and potentially become. But Willem's reaction to these discoveries set him apart from many of his students. While others saw the old blood as a gift, a tool to elevate humanity, Willem saw danger. He formulated his most important teaching, the adage that would become central to his philosophy, and would be remembered long after Byrgenwerth fell to ruin. Fear the old blood. This was not mere superstition or conservative resistance to progress. Willem understood something fundamental about the blood, some terrible truth that made him adamantly opposed to its use. He would repeat this warning to his students, inscribe it into the very foundation of his teachings, and eventually watch in horror as those closest to him ignored it. According to the adage as recorded in full, we are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. This warning suggested that blood was simultaneously humanity's origin, its defining characteristic, and its doom. The phrase, "our eyes are yet to open," hinted at Willem's alternative path to ascension. If blood was dangerous, if it would undo humanity, then the answer must lie elsewhere. Willem looked to the Great Ones for guidance, studying them not to imitate their blood, but to understand their consciousness, their perception, their way of seeing reality. He came to believe that the path to transcendence lay in insight, in literally expanding human consciousness to perceive higher planes. This philosophy would become the cornerstone of everything Willem attempted. Where others pursued blood ministration, Willem pursued enlightenment through sight, through understanding, through the lining of brains with eyes. It was a metaphorical concept elevated to an inhuman state, the idea that to think as the Great Ones thought, one must first see as they saw, and to see as they saw required more than human eyes could provide. But before we can fully understand Willem's philosophy and its consequences, we must confront one of the darkest chapters in Byrgenwerth's history, the Fishing Hamlet massacre. This event, revealed in Bloodborne's The Old Hunters DLC, casts a long shadow over Willem's legacy and raises questions about the cost of knowledge that he seems never to have fully answered. The Fishing Hamlet was a small coastal village, isolated and unremarkable except for one transformative event. The corpse of a great one washed ashore on its beach. This being, known as Kos, or as some say Kos, had already died from unknown circumstances before arriving at the hamlet. But even dead Kos brought change. Parasites that had lived within the Great One poured from its corpse when it beached. The villagers, simple fishing folk, took this as a sign of kindness from a benevolent deity and began worshipping Kos. They integrated the parasites into their lives, using them as fuel, harvesting their oil, and through prolonged exposure, or perhaps through Kos's lingering influence, the villagers themselves began to transform. They became fish-like hybrids, amphibious humanoids with physiology that blurred the line between human and sea creature. Their eyes multiplied, lining their brains just as Willem sought to do through different means. In a sense, these simple villagers achieved what Byrgenwerth scholars desperately pursued, granted ascension through proximity to a Great One. But this transformation, and the presence of a Great One's corpse, could not remain secret forever. When word reached Byrgenwerth that a Great One had washed ashore, scholars from the college responded. What followed was not a peaceful research expedition, but a violent raid. The scholars of Byrgenwerth, along with hunters, descended upon the fishing hamlet. The exact composition of this force remains somewhat unclear, but we know certain names. Gehrman, the first hunter, was there. Lady Maria, his apprentice, and a skilled warrior in her own right, participated in the massacre. Whether Willem himself physically traveled to the hamlet remains uncertain, though as Provost of Byrgenwerth, the institution he led was deeply implicated in what transpired. What transpired at the fishing hamlet was genocide. The raid was not merely about studying Kos or collecting samples. It was systematic butchery. Villagers' heads were trepanned open in the search for eyes, the literal eyes that had grown in their skulls as they transformed. The scholars of Byrgenwerth wanted those eyes, needed them for their research into ascension. They dug up corpses and violated the bodies of the living in their desperate hunt for insight. The corpse of Kos itself was desecrated. The scholars found within Kos's body an unborn child, the orphan of Kos, and they took it. They extracted one of the infant Great One's 3 umbilical cords, the cord of the eye, so named because it was lined with eyes on the inside. This artifact was precisely what Provost Willem sought, believing such a relic could elevate human being and thoughts to those of a Great One, potentially allowing humanity to match the Great One's perception and power. Lady Maria, disgusted by her role in these atrocities, threw her beloved weapon, the rakuyo, into the dark well at the hamlet's center, and swore off hunting entirely. The emotional and moral weight of what she had participated in broke something within her, and she would never fully recover from that trauma. Gehrman too would carry the burden of the Fishing Hamlet, though his guilt manifested differently. But the consequences of the Fishing Hamlet massacre extended far beyond the psychological damage to its perpetrators. The surviving fishmen and the spirit of Cause herself placed a curse upon the hunters. This curse would draw all hunters who participated in the massacre, and eventually all who became blood-drunk in their pursuit of beasts, into the hunter's nightmare. There they would be forced to relive their crimes for eternity, trapped in an endless cycle of hunting and violence, never finding peace, never escaping the weight of what they had done. The Fishing Hamlet priest, one of the few survivors, wanders the nightmare even now, muttering prayers and curses. Byrgenwerth, Byrgenwerth, blasphemous murderers, blood-crazed fiends, atonement for the wretches, by the wrath of Mother Cos, mercy for the poor, wizened child. The priest's words reveal the hatred the Hamlet's people felt for Byrgenwerth, their absolute condemnation of Willem and his scholars as murderers who violated something sacred. They call for Mother Cos to lay the curse of blood upon the scholars and their children and their children's children, for each wretched birth to plunge each child into a lifetime of misery. Whether this curse extended beyond the hunters to influence the scourge of beasts that would later consume Yharnam is a matter of interpretation, though the connection between Cos's wrath and the wider tragedy of blood remains tantalizing. Willem obtained his Cord of the Eye. Byrgenwerth gained knowledge about the Great Ones and their offspring, but the cost was a blood debt that could never be repaid, a curse that would haunt hunters for generations, and a moral stain that would forever taint the institution's pursuit of enlightenment. Yet even as the consequences of the Fishing Hamlet began to manifest, an even greater schism was forming within Byrgenwerth itself, the divide between Master Willem and his closest student, Laurence. Laurence was one of Willem's most promising pupils, possibly his closest protégé. He was brilliant, charismatic, and deeply committed to the pursuit of elevating humanity. But where Willem saw danger in the old blood, Laurence saw opportunity. He believed that the blood was the key to mankind's ascension, that its healing properties and transformative potential made it not something to fear, but something to embrace, to study, to master. The philosophical divide between teacher and student grew wider with each passing day. Willem remained steadfast in his conviction that insight, not blood, was the path to transcendence. He wanted to line human brains with eyes, to expand consciousness and perception until humanity could comprehend the Great Ones on their own level. Laurence argued that this was too slow, too uncertain, that blood ministration offered immediate results, tangible improvements to human health and capability. The old blood could cure any disease, grant strength beyond normal human limits, and potentially facilitate the very transformation Willem sought, but through a more direct method. The confrontation between them was inevitable. In a scene that players witness as a memory, when touching Laurence's skull in the Grand Cathedral, we hear the final conversation between student and master. Laurence approaches Willem with the words, "Master Willem, I have come to bid you farewell." Willem, sitting in what may have been that same rocking chair where we later find him, responds with resignation and pain. "Oh, I know. You think now to betray me." The word betrayal carries immense weight here. Willem was not simply losing a student or a colleague. He was losing someone he had mentored, perhaps even loved, someone in whom he had invested years of teaching and trust. Laurence leaving to pursue blood ministration was not just an intellectual disagreement. It was a personal wound, a rejection of everything Willem stood for. Laurence tries to reassure him. "No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage." He promises to remember the teaching, to hold it in his heart even as he pursues a different path. Then Willem speaks the full adage, perhaps for the last time to Laurence's ears. "We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open, and together, in a moment of unity despite their impending separation, they speak the central warning: fear the old blood. Laurence adds, "I must take my leave." And after he departs, Willem is left alone with his fears, muttering to himself, or perhaps to the gods he sought to comprehend. "By the gods, fear it, Laurence." This plea, spoken to an empty room, reveals Willem's deep concern for what his student was about to unleash. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, what the old blood was capable of doing to those who used it without proper caution. The implication in his voice suggests he understood that Laurence's promise to not forget the adage was insufficient. Remembering the warning while simultaneously ignoring it was not the same as heeding it, and Willem's fears would prove entirely justified. Laurence left Byrgenwerth and traveled to Yharnam. With him went other scholars who shared his vision, including Michelash, Gehrman, and many others who would become the founding members of the Healing Church. Lady Maria would eventually join them as well, seeking purpose after her disillusionment with hunting following the Fishing Hamlet massacre. In Yharnam, Laurence demonstrated the healing properties of blood ministration, showing how the old blood could cure diseases, restore health, and grant vitality. The promise of a panacea, a cure for all ailments, drew people to Yharnam from across the land. The city flourished, growing wealthy and powerful as blood ministration became the cornerstone of its medical practice. Laurence became the first vicar of the Healing Church, the head of a new religious and medical institution that would come to dominate Yharnam entirely. But Laurence did not completely abandon his roots at Byrgenwerth. The uniforms of the Healing Church were modeled after Willem's own attire. The practice of covering one's eyes to gain insight, a concept tied to Willem's philosophy, was incorporated into the church's traditions. Even the central adage, "Fear the old blood," became the password required to enter the Forbidden Woods and access Byrgenwerth itself, suggesting some level of continued cooperation, or at least communication between the two institutions. Yet the substance behind these gestures was fundamentally different from Willem's teachings. The Healing Church paid lip service to Byrgenwerth's philosophy while pursuing blood ministration with fervor. They conducted experiments, attempting to control the scourge of beasts, the transformation that began to afflict those who partook too heavily of the blood. They discovered the Beast's Embrace rune, a gentle rune that was supposed to help manage beastly transformation, but when its implementation failed, it became forbidden knowledge. The experiments continued regardless. Laurence himself carried a pendant, fashioned with a unique gold blood gem, effective at harming beasts, perhaps as his own talisman against the transformation he feared. But fear of beasts did not stop the Healing Church from continuing their blood ministration. The promise of ascension, the possibility of elevating humanity, was too seductive to abandon. Back at Byrgenwerth, Willem watched as his former students flourished in Yharnam, while his own institution fell into obscurity. The Healing Church grew in power and influence, while Byrgenwerth's teachings were gradually forgotten by the wider world. But Willem did not cease his own work. If anything, the schism with Laurence may have reinforced his conviction that his path, not theirs, was the correct one. And working alongside Willem during these crucial years was another student whose contributions would prove fundamental to understanding the Great Ones: runesmith Caryll. Caryll was one of the most revered and important figures associated with Byrgenwerth, possessing a unique ability that no other scholar could replicate. Caryll could hear the inhuman utterances of the Great Ones and transcribe them into symbols, into what became known as Caryll Runes. The Great Ones speak in sounds incomprehensible to human speech, metaphorical concepts elevated to an inhuman state that cannot be expressed through ordinary language. Their words exist on a different level of reality, requiring a mind attuned to their frequency to even perceive them. Caryll had such attunement. When the Great Ones spoke, Caryll heard them, and more importantly, could capture their meaning in written form. These runes were not mere symbols. They contained the essence of what the Great Ones communicated, preserving not just the sound but the power and meaning behind it. When someone memorized a Caryll rune, etching it into their mind, they could access the benefits associated with that rune. These benefits ranged from increased physical resilience to enhanced perception, to the ability to draw resources from defeated enemies. The runes literally inscribed themselves into consciousness, becoming part of the person who learned them. Willem would have been proud of Caryll's work, as several rune descriptions note, because the runes did not rely upon blood in any measure. They represented a path to power and understanding that aligned perfectly with Willem's philosophy. Rather than altering the body through blood, the runes elevated the mind through insight. They granted abilities without requiring the user to risk beastly transformation. Among the most significant runes Caryll transcribed was the Eye, described as a secret symbol left by Caryll, the transcription of the word I, as spoken by the Great Ones. This rune allowed one to make additional discoveries, literally enhancing the user's ability to perceive hidden truths. The Eye symbolized exactly what Willem sought in his research: expanded perception, the opening of eyes to see what ordinary humans could not. The process of creating these runes may have been far from pleasant. The utterances of the Great Ones could have literally inscribed themselves into Caryll's consciousness, and the gift may have come with physical cost. The Rune Workshop tool, an implement that allows hunters to etch runes into their minds, appears to be a branding iron, suggesting that the process of learning runes involves literal burning, inscribing the symbols through pain and transformation. The reverence with which Caryll was remembered, suggested by statues that appear even in the Pythagorean tombs, indicates that these contributions were recognized as profoundly important. Not all runes were transcribed by Caryll directly. Some were discovered by others, or manifested through unique circumstances. Ludwig, who would later become a legendary hunter for the Healing Church, discovered the Guidance Rune, which was still classified as a Caryll rune, despite not being Caryll's transcription. The Milkweed Rune was visualized by Adeline, a research patient in the research hall. But the methodology, the framework for understanding and utilizing these inhuman utterances, was established by Caryll at Byrgenwerth, under Willem's guidance. This work created a foundation that would be built upon for generations. Yet even as Caryll captured the words of gods and Willem pursued his vision of human ascension through insight, the question remained: how could humanity actually line their brains with eyes? What did that phrase truly mean? And how could it be achieved? Willem came to understand that the key lay with the Great Ones themselves, specifically with their offspring. He had an epiphany, a moment of clarity that would define his final years of research. We are thinking on the basest of planes. What we need are more eyes. This was not metaphorical language. Willem literally sought to increase the number of eyes perceiving reality, to add new senses and new dimensions of perception to human consciousness. And the path to achieving this involved the umbilical cords of infant Great Ones. Every infant Great One possesses what is known as 1/3 of an umbilical cord, a relic also called the cord of the eye. These cords are lined with eyes internally, containing within them the essence of enhanced perception. Willem believed that by utilizing these cords, by somehow integrating their properties into human consciousness, people could elevate their beings and thoughts to those of Great Ones. This was the only choice he knew. If humanity were to ever match the Great One's perception and understanding, the cord of the eye that Willem's scholars extracted from the Orphan of Cause was one of these precious relics. Finding others would prove difficult, as infant Great Ones were extraordinarily rare, and the circumstances of their birth shrouded in mystery and tragedy. But Willem's pursuit of this goal shaped his final years and led to his most significant and most morally ambiguous achievement: Rom the Vacuous Spider. Rom was once a scholar at Byrgenwerth, a human being who studied under Willem alongside the other students. Her original identity remains unknown. We do not know her name before transformation, what led her to Byrgenwerth, or the exact circumstances of what came next. But at some point Rom underwent a metamorphosis that Michaelash directly attributes to Cause when he prays, "As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes." The precise mechanism of this transformation remains unclear. Some believe it was Cause's direct intervention as punishment or reward related to the Fishing Hamlet. Others suggest Willem may have utilized the cord of the eye extracted from Cause's orphan in his experiments. Whatever the truth, Rom transformed from human into something else entirely. She became what is classified as kin, beings that were once human but have ascended to a higher form. Rom's new shape bears little resemblance to a spider, despite her title. She looks more like an enormous pillbug or grub, with a silver fish-like tail and a bulbous body from which plant-like appendages grow, resembling cold blood flowers. Her face is covered in eyes, countless eyes, fulfilling literally the goal of lining the brain with eyes. She achieved what Willem theorized was possible, became living proof that human consciousness could expand to perceive higher planes of reality. But the cost of this achievement was staggering. Rom is called vacuous, meaning empty, lacking thought or intelligence. The Japanese name for her, translating to Roma, the idiotic spider, reinforces this characterization. Despite presumably ascending to see more than any human could comprehend, Rom appears to have lost something fundamental in the process. Whether she lost her memories, her sense of self, her ability to process what she perceives, or simply her connection to human concerns is unclear. What we know is that Rom does not communicate in any recognizable way. She does not act with apparent purpose, beyond defending herself when threatened. She is passive, sitting in Moonside Lake beneath Byrgenwerth, accompanied by smaller spider-like creatures. The nature of these creatures is uncertain. They could be offspring, familiars, or manifestations of her transformed consciousness. But the game provides no definitive answer. When Michaelash, host of the nightmare, prays to Kos, he references Rom directly. Ah, Kos. Or some say Kos. Do you hear our prayers? As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes. Grant us eyes. Plant eyes on our brains, to cleanse our beastly idiocy. This prayer confirms that Rom's transformation was granted by Kos, and that it involved the literal planting of eyes in her brain. It also reveals that others, like Michaelash, desperately sought the same ascension Rom achieved. But Rom's significance extends beyond merely being proof of concept for Willem's theories. She serves a crucial function in protecting or perhaps imprisoning the world. Rom hides all manner of rituals, concealing from ordinary human perception the true horrors that exist around them. Throughout Yharnam, lesser amygdala cling to buildings, cosmic horrors hiding in plain sight. Most people cannot see them, protected by ignorance that Rom maintains. The barrier she creates keeps the blood moon from descending, prevents certain eldritch truths from becoming manifest, and in a sense keeps the nightmare at bay. Whether Willem intended for Rom to serve this function, or whether she chose this role herself after transformation, is unknown. A note found on the second floor of Byrgenwerth reads, "The spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared." This suggests that Rom's concealment is deliberate, that true enlightenment perhaps should not be shared because humanity cannot handle it, because seeing the truth entire would break human minds. Another note from the library area beyond Tomb of Odon states, "The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us." This phrasing is particularly intriguing because it suggests Rom keeps something or someone hidden, described as our lost master. The identity of this lost master has been debated. It could refer to Rom keeping Willem isolated at Byrgenwerth through her control over perception and reality, or it might reference a Great One, or some other entity that Rom conceals from those who would seek it. The text itself offers no definitive answer. Regardless of interpretation, Rom's role as concealer, as keeper of secrets, defines her existence in her transformed state. She sits in the lake, surrounded by her smaller spider companions, maintaining the veil between reality and nightmare, and Willem sits on the balcony above, pointing down at her, directing hunters toward the one he helped create. This relationship between Willem and Rom raises profound questions. Did he care for her as a person, mourn what she lost in transformation? Or did he see her purely as an experiment, proof that his theories were valid? When the player defeats Rom and the barrier falls, when the blood moon descends and the amygdala become visible, and the true horror of Yharnam's situation becomes apparent, we see the consequence of Willem's success. He proved that humanity could perceive higher planes, but whether that perception benefits humanity is deeply questionable. Rom may have been protecting the world from truths it could not handle, and Willem sends hunters to destroy that protection. His motivations remain opaque. Perhaps he believes humanity must face the truth regardless of cost. Perhaps he recognizes that Rom's barrier cannot hold forever, and destruction on human terms is preferable to inevitable collapse. Or perhaps there is some other purpose we cannot discern from his silent gesture. What we know is that Rom represents both Willem's greatest achievement and perhaps his greatest failure, proof that his theories were valid, but also proof that the cost of ascension might exceed what any human should pay. As Laurence built his healing church in Yharnam and Willem pursued his vision at Byrgenwerth, the college itself began to decline. The schism with the healing church had deprived Byrgenwerth of many of its scholars, the brightest minds having followed Laurence to pursue blood ministration. Those who remained were fewer, perhaps more devoted to Willem's philosophy, but also more isolated from the wider world. Byrgenwerth became forbidden ground. The woods around it grew wild and thick, natural growth, or perhaps deliberate cultivation, creating a barrier that hid the college from casual approach. The path to Byrgenwerth was sealed, accessible only to those who knew the password, the old adage shared between Byrgenwerth and the healing church: fear the old blood. A watchman from Byrgenwerth guarded the gate, ensuring that only those who understood the sacred adage could pass. This cooperation between Byrgenwerth and the healing church is curious given their philosophical divide. The physical decline of Byrgenwerth mirrors the intellectual and institutional collapse that Willem presided over in his final years. When players first arrive at the college, they find a building that speaks of former grandeur now fallen into ruin. The architecture suggests this was once a place of significance, with its lunarium for astronomical observation, its lecture halls for teaching, its library for storing accumulated knowledge. The structure itself was built to facilitate the pursuit of truth, with spaces designed for contemplation, study, and the systematic cataloging of discoveries. But by the time the hunter arrives, these spaces are largely empty, abandoned, left to decay. The lecture halls contain no lecturers and no students. The library holds scattered notes, but no librarians. The lunarium is accessible only through a key specifically kept for it, suggesting it has been locked away from general use for some time. The enemies inhabiting Byrgenwerth tell their own story about the college's transformation. Giant spiders, creatures that bear resemblance to Rom's smaller companions, infest the halls and gardens. These are not natural creatures, but manifestations of something cosmic, something tied to Rom's existence in the lake below. Their presence throughout the college suggests that Rom's influence has spread beyond the lake itself, that the barrier she creates and the secrets she conceals have physically transformed the environment of Byrgenwerth. The college has become less a place of human scholarship and more an extension of Rom's alien consciousness, a space caught between material reality and the cosmic truths it once sought to uncover. This transformation from academic institution to eldritch-touched ruin embodies the cost of the knowledge Willem pursued. The pursuit itself has rendered the institution uninhabitable for ordinary humans, accessible only to those willing to fight their way through manifestations of the very truths the college was founded to study. The Garden of Byrgenwerth, overgrown and wild, contains its own secrets and tells its own stories. Here we find the pilgrim, a mysterious figure covered in what appear to be shells or cocoons, kneeling among the weeds and flowers. The pilgrim sells items related to insight and discovery, suggesting some ongoing function within the decayed college's ecosystem, though whether this figure is a former scholar, a manifestation of something else entirely, or simply a merchant who has found a niche in this strange place remains unclear. The garden's overgrowth suggests years or decades of neglect, as though maintaining the grounds ceased to be a priority once the scholars departed or died. Nature reclaims what humanity abandons. But in Bloodborne, that reclamation carries its own sinister implications. The plants grow thick and strange, the paths become obscured, and one wonders what might be cultivated in soil soaked with knowledge of the Great Ones, watered by rain falling on a place where cosmic truth was sought so obsessively. Inside the college, the few remaining notes provide fragments of the knowledge that was pursued here. When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the Great Ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. This observation sits on a bookshelf, waiting to be read by anyone who penetrates this far into Byrgenwerth's secrets. It is simultaneously profound insight into the nature of the Great Ones and their relationship with humanity, and also deeply unsettling in its implications about what the Great Ones desire from human wombs. Another note reads, "The spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared." This represents a fundamental shift in Byrgenwerth's mission, from an institution dedicated to expanding and sharing knowledge to one that conceals and protects secrets deemed too dangerous for general dissemination. This shift from openness to concealment marks Willem's evolution from enthusiastic seeker to isolated guardian. Byrgenwerth's physical location is also significant. It sits beside Moonside Lake, separated from Yharnam proper by the Forbidden Woods, isolated and remote. This isolation is both practical and symbolic. Practically, it kept the college away from population centers, reducing the risk that its experiments and discoveries might immediately affect ordinary citizens. The distance provided a buffer, a space where dangerous research could be conducted without putting the general public at immediate risk. Symbolically, the isolation represents Byrgenwerth's relationship with mainstream society. Separate, distant, operating according to its own rules, and pursuing its own goals without much concern for or connection to the everyday world of commerce, politics, and social life. The Forbidden Woods themselves serve as a transition zone, a threshold between the ordinary world and the space where cosmic truth is pursued. These woods are dangerous, filled with hostile inhabitants, including the strange snake-headed villagers, who worship something primordial and deadly. The journey through the woods tests anyone who seeks to reach Byrgenwerth, ensuring that only the capable or desperate make it through. This makes Byrgenwerth self-selecting in a sense. Those who arrive are those who have proven they can survive the dangers between civilization and cosmic knowledge. The watchman at the gate provides a second filter, allowing through only those who know the password, who understand that one should fear the old blood. Thus, multiple barriers protect Byrgenwerth's secrets, and anyone who penetrates to the college itself has demonstrated both capability and some degree of understanding. The lake itself is perhaps the most significant feature of Byrgenwerth's physical location. Moonside Lake is not merely a body of water, but a boundary between worlds, a place where Rom maintains the barrier, separating ordinary reality from the nightmare of cosmic truth. The lake's water reflects the moon, connecting it to the celestial bodies that Willem studied in his lunarium, suggesting a relationship between the heavens above and the depths below, between the astronomical and the aquatic, between what can be observed from a distance and what must be entered directly to understand. Jumping into the lake is both a literal descent into water and a symbolic descent into hidden truth. You sink below the surface of ordinary perception and encounter Rom directly, coming face to face with the results of Byrgenwerth's ultimate achievement. The structure of Byrgenwerth also tells us about the progression of knowledge within the college. One enters at the bottom floor, fights through the main building, ascends to the second floor, where more dangerous enemies and more significant notes can be found, and ultimately reaches the highest point, the lunarium balcony where Willem sits. This upward journey mirrors the pursuit of enlightenment itself, climbing from base understanding toward elevated perception. But the highest point does not offer a view of the heavens alone. From Willem's balcony, you look down at the lake, at Rom, at the secret hidden in the depths. The highest understanding, it seems, requires recognizing that truth lies not only in the heights, but in the depths, not only in ascending toward the divine, but in descending into the reality that divinity represents. This architectural metaphor, ascension to descend, rising to see what is below, captures something essential about Byrgenwerth's project and Willem's philosophy. Ordinary people operate on the ground level, the first floor, concerned with immediate and material reality. Scholars who pursue knowledge ascend, climbing the stairs of understanding, gaining new perspectives with each level they attain. But the ultimate perspective, the one Willem achieved, requires recognizing that the highest understanding points back downward, toward depths that ordinary perception cannot reach, toward truths hidden beneath the surface of things. The scholar's journey is not a straight line upward, but a spiral, up to gain perspective, then down to penetrate hidden reality, then up again to integrate what was found below, then down again to seek even deeper truths. Willem has completed so many cycles of this spiral that he sits at what appears to be the apex, yet all he can do is point downward, directing others to descend as he once did. Byrgenwerth's institutional legacy extends beyond its physical ruins and scattered research. The college pioneered methodologies that would be adopted and adapted by later institutions. The Healing Church's research hall, where the patients are subjected to experiments seeking to line their brains with eyes, directly continues Byrgenwerth's research program, even while officially operating under different philosophical premises. The choir's pursuit of communion with the Great Ones, through study and understanding, rather than solely through blood, represents another continuation of Willem's approach. Even the School of Mensis, led by Michaelash, can be seen as an offshoot of Byrgenwerth's tradition. They study the Great Ones, seek to understand and commune with them, pursue transcendence through knowledge, rather than solely through physical transformation. In these descendant institutions, we see Byrgenwerth's methods living on even as its original facility falls to ruin, and its founder sits silent and transformed. The college also established precedents that would echo through Yharnam's history: the use of human subjects for dangerous experiments, the pursuit of knowledge regardless of moral cost, the belief that understanding cosmic truth justifies terrible actions. These patterns recur throughout the Healing Church's activities, and the various research programs undertaken in pursuit of ascension. Byrgenwerth proved that such research could yield results, that humans could in fact transform or transcend, that the Great Ones could be studied and potentially understood. This proof of concept opened doors that perhaps should have remained closed, demonstrated possibilities that others would pursue with even less restraint than Willem exercised. If Willem had never founded Byrgenwerth, had never sent expeditions into the Pthumerian labyrinths, had never authorized the raid on the Fishing Hamlet, would Yharnam's later atrocities have occurred? Or did Byrgenwerth establish the template that others would follow toward increasingly disastrous ends? This question of responsibility brings us back to Willem himself, sitting on his balcony, pointing at the lake. He founded the institution that pioneered the pursuit of cosmic truth through systematic study. He trained the students who would go on to create the Healing Church and its various offshoots. He authorized, or at least failed to prevent, the actions that resulted in the Fishing Hamlet massacre and other moral catastrophes. He created Rom, transforming a human scholar into an eldritch spider creature. He pursued knowledge at costs that included human lives, human sanity, and humanity itself. And yet he also warned against the very catastrophes that would unfold, opposed the use of blood that led to the scourge of beasts, advocated for restraint and caution. Even as he pursued dangerous research, he both enabled disaster and tried to prevent it, both opened forbidden doors and tried to keep others from entering them. Byrgenwerth, as institution and location, embodies this contradiction. It is simultaneously a place of learning and a place of horror, a beacon of enlightenment and a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking knowledge without adequate consideration of consequences. The college sought truth and found it, but the truth it found offered no salvation, no improvement to human existence, no path forward that did not require sacrificing essential aspects of humanity. The pursuit of eyes led to losing the ability to see what mattered. The quest for insight led to isolation from ordinary human experience. The attempt to elevate humanity to the level of gods resulted in transforming humans into monsters or alien entities that retained little of what made them human to begin with. Byrgenwerth's legacy is this paradox: success that looks like failure, achievement that feels like loss, truth that provides no comfort, and offers no guidance for how to live with what has been learned. It suggests that despite their differences, both institutions recognize the importance of controlling access to Byrgenwerth, of keeping its secrets from the masses. Perhaps Willem agreed to this arrangement to protect his work from those who would misuse it. Perhaps the Healing Church wanted to prevent others from accessing Byrgenwerth's knowledge and challenging their monopoly on blood ministration. Whatever the reason, Byrgenwerth became a place of secrets, hidden away, spoken of in whispers if at all. As the years passed, even faithful scholars began to abandon Willem, whether they died, left to pursue other interests, or simply could no longer bear the isolation. We do not know, but by the time the player reaches Byrgenwerth, it is a place of ruin and desolation. The grand building that once housed classrooms and laboratories now stands largely empty. Spider creatures infest its halls, perhaps manifestations of Rom's influence or perhaps drawn by the same eldritch forces that transformed her. The garden is overgrown, the architecture crumbling, every surface suggesting abandonment and decay. Inside, notes and messages remain, scattered evidence of the research conducted here. Lore notes speak of the red moon hanging low, and the line between man and beast blurring. They reference the Great Ones descending, and wombs being blessed with child. They preserve fragments of knowledge about rituals and transformations and cosmic truths. But these notes are all that remain of a once thriving academic institution. The scholars are gone. The students have scattered. Only Willem endures, sitting on his balcony, keeping his vigil over the lake. And what has become of Willem himself during these long years of isolation? When the player encounters Master Willem, he is barely recognizable as human. Sitting in his rocking chair on the balcony, he has clearly undergone profound physical changes. The most obvious transformation is the growth on the back of his neck and head. These white, mushroom-like or coral-like protrusions resemble cordyceps fungi, organisms that infect the brains of their hosts. They also bear similarity to the growths on Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, one of the Great Ones, suggesting that Willem may be experiencing some form of ascension or communion with higher beings. Whether these growths represent success in his quest to line his brain with eyes, or simply corruption and degeneration, is debated. Willem has lost the ability to speak. When approached, he only points toward the lake and occasionally sighs. He cannot or will not communicate through language, reduced to simple gestures. This loss of speech parallels Rom's apparent loss of thought, suggesting that the transformation Willem sought comes with cognitive costs. Perhaps human language becomes inadequate or irrelevant when one perceives higher truths. Perhaps the transformation damages the brain's language centers. Or perhaps Willem simply has nothing left to say, has moved beyond the need for words. Most strikingly, Willem bleeds silver-white blood rather than red. This is not the grayish-green blood of certain kin or celestial beings, but a bright silvery color, similar to that of the doll in the hunter's dream. This unusual blood indicates that Willem has fundamentally changed on a biological level, that whatever he has done to himself has altered his very essence. Normal humans and beasts bleed red. Those who have ascended or transformed into kin often bleed differently. Willem's blood suggests he exists somewhere between human and something else, partway along the path he mapped out for humanity. His physical frailty is pronounced. He appears ancient, his body wasted, barely able to move. The description of the lunarium key notes that in his final years, Willem was fond of the lookout and the rocking chair he kept there for meditation. This suggests he spends his time gazing at the lake, at Rom, at the result of his life's work, contemplating what he has achieved and what it cost. Whether he experiences pain, regret, satisfaction, or transcendent understanding, we cannot know. His face shows no clear emotion, just that blank, eye-covered visage turned toward the water. If the player chooses to attack and kill Willem, he drops the eye rune, the very symbol of his life's pursuit, the transcription of the word as spoken by the Great Ones. He also drops Madman's knowledge, or blood echoes, resources tied to insight and understanding. Even in death he provides what he sought in life, enhanced perception, the ability to see more clearly. But perhaps most tellingly, when attacked, Willem seems to curse something, or someone, without saying a word, his mouth moving in silent rage or condemnation. Is he cursing the hunter who strikes him? Cursing Laurence for abandoning his teachings? Cursing the Great Ones for the terrible truths they revealed? Or cursing himself for the path he chose? We will never know, because his voice, like so much else about him, is lost to the transformation he underwent. The growths on Willem's body have led to much speculation about his condition. Some believe they represent success, that Willem managed to partially line his brain with eyes, and these growths are the physical manifestation of that achievement. The eyes would be internal, within his skull, granting him perception beyond human limits. The external growths would be side effects, benign or perhaps beneficial, evidence of communion with higher beings. Others interpret the growths as signs of failure or corruption, suggesting that Willem's attempts to ascend have instead infected him with something parasitic, something that feeds on his consciousness while giving little in return. The fact that he cannot speak, can barely move, and appears to be trapped at Byrgenwerth, rather than free to pursue knowledge elsewhere, suggests that whatever he has achieved came at a devastating cost. There is also the question of his apparent immortality, or at least extreme longevity. Willem has lived an extraordinarily long time, far beyond normal human lifespan. He was already an established scholar, a provost, during the Parthumerian expeditions. He mentored Laurence, Gehrman, and other figures whose stories span decades. He witnessed the rise and fall of the healing church, the spread of the scourge of beasts, the transformation of Yharnam, from thriving city to nightmare. How many years, how many decades, or even centuries has Willem endured? Normal humans in Bloodborne's world follow the same rules of mortality as humans in our world. They grow old and die. Willem has not died. This suggests he is no longer entirely human, that his transformations have granted him either indefinite lifespan or such slowed aging that he persists when others would have long since perished. But is this immortality a gift or a curse? To sit alone in a ruined college for untold years, unable to speak, watching over a lake that contains your greatest success and arguably your greatest failure, transformed beyond humanity, but still bound to this single place, this does not seem like triumph. It seems like punishment, like a terrible price paid for knowledge that perhaps should never have been sought. Willem's endurance may not be jubilant immortality, but rather an inability to escape the consequences of his own choices. Yet Willem's influence extends far beyond his physical presence at Byrgenwerth. His teachings, his philosophy, his warnings all continue to shape the world long after his college fell to ruin. The healing church, despite abandoning his adage against blood use, still maintains connections to Byrgenwerth's intellectual tradition. Perhaps the most direct continuation of Willem's work exists in the choir, the highest-ranking members of the healing church. These are scholars and clerics who continued researching the Great Ones, who pursued communion with higher beings, who sought ascension through understanding rather than merely through blood. The choir wears distinctive attire that includes coverings over their eyes, blindfolds that might seem counterintuitive for those seeking insight. But this practice traces directly back to Willem's teachings. The idea is that by blocking ordinary sight, one can focus on inner vision, on the eyes within rather than without, perceiving truths that physical vision obscures. This represents the choir's debt to Willem's philosophy, even as they operate within an institution founded in opposition to him. They adapted his teachings, incorporated them into the healing church's framework, created a synthesis between blood ministration and the pursuit of eyes. Whether this synthesis was what Willem would have wanted is doubtful, but it demonstrates the lasting power of his ideas. The choir conducted their own experiments in the Upper Cathedral ward, research that involved subjects we now call the celestial emissaries and the celestial mob. These beings were humans transformed, experimented upon in attempts to create kin, to force ascension through combination of blood ministration and exposure to the Great Ones. In the research hall within the Hunter's Nightmare, we see the true cost of these experiments. Research patients whose heads swelled grotesquely as their brains expanded, who suffered and died, or became something inhuman, all in pursuit of lining brains with eyes. Adeline, one of these patients, begs the hunter to bring her brain fluid so she can continue expanding her consciousness, can continue pursuing the vision that was promised to her. When she finally achieves her transformation, when she visualizes the milkweed rune, she describes seeing something wonderful, something that makes all the suffering worthwhile. But from an outside perspective, Adeline's transformation is horrifying, her head swollen and misshapen, her body twisted, her humanity sacrificed for a glimpse of cosmic truth. Is this what Willem envisioned? Did he want humans to suffer such degradation in pursuit of eyes? Or would he have been horrified by what the healing church's interpretation of his philosophy produced? We cannot ask him. He sits on his balcony, silent, pointing at Rom, offering no judgment on what his intellectual children have become. To truly understand Willem's significance in Bloodborne's world, we must examine his methodology and philosophical approach more deeply. Willem was fundamentally a scholar of the old school, someone who believed that truth could be uncovered through systematic study, careful observation, and patient accumulation of knowledge. His approach to the Great Ones was not one of worship or supplication, but of analysis and understanding. He did not pray to these cosmic entities for favors. Instead, he studied them as phenomena to be comprehended, seeking to understand the principles by which they operated and the nature of reality they perceived. This scientific approach to the supernatural set Willem apart from the religious fervor that would later characterize the healing church, where Laurence and his followers treated the old blood as a holy sacrament, something to be revered and distributed as a blessing. Willem examined it as a substance, with properties to be catalogued and understood. His warning to fear the old blood was not religious doctrine, but a scientific conclusion reached through observation and reason. He had seen what the blood could do, understood its transformative properties, and recognized that these transformations were not necessarily benevolent or controllable. His fear was rational, based on evidence, grounded in the understanding that humanity did not yet comprehend what they were dealing with when they began transfusing the blood of gods into mortal bodies. This is why Willem's approach focused on insight rather than blood. Insight in the world of Bloodborne is not merely knowledge or understanding in the abstract sense. It is literally the capacity to perceive realities that ordinary human senses cannot detect. At low insight, a hunter walks through Yharnam, seeing only what appears to be there: streets, buildings, beasts. At higher insight, that same hunter begins to perceive the amygdala clinging to architecture, hears the whispers of the Great Ones, sees the cosmic truth underlying the material world. Willem understood that this expanded perception was the key to true ascension, not changing what you are through blood, but expanding how you see through insight. This distinction is fundamental to his philosophy. Blood changes the body, potentially transforming it into something monstrous. Insight changes perception, potentially elevating consciousness to a higher plane. Blood pulls you down into beasthood. Insight lifts you up toward the divine, or so Willem believed. The reality, as we can observe in Willem himself and in Rom, is that the pursuit of insight also carries terrible costs. But at least these costs are different from the mindless savagery of the beast. A human transformed into a beast loses everything that made them human, becoming pure instinct and hunger. A human who achieves insight may lose the ability to communicate with other humans, may become alien and strange, but potentially retains some core of self even as that self expands beyond ordinary human boundaries. Willem's methodology for achieving this insight was multifaceted. First, there was study. The expeditions into the Pthumerian labyrinths were not treasure hunts but archaeological research, systematic excavation of knowledge left behind by a civilization that had already walked the path toward cosmic understanding. The Pthumerians had communicated with the Great Ones, built their civilization around these entities, and ultimately paid a price for that communion. By studying their ruins, their rituals, their remaining texts and artifacts, Willem sought to learn from their successes and failures. What had they done right? What had destroyed them? Could humanity learn the lessons needed to avoid their fate, while still achieving their goals? These were the questions driving Byrgenwerth's research into the labyrinths. Second, there was direct observation of the Great Ones themselves. Byrgenwerth scholars sought out these entities, studied their behaviors, attempted to communicate with them. This is where Caryll's work became invaluable. The Great Ones spoke, but in sounds that human ears could hear, yet human minds could not comprehend. Their utterances existed on a frequency or in a conceptual space beyond ordinary language. Caryll bridged that gap, translating the incomprehensible into symbols that could be grasped and utilized. Through Caryll's transcriptions, Willem and his scholars gained access to fragments of the Great One's knowledge, insights into how these beings perceived reality, clues about the nature of the cosmos itself. Each rune was a window into a different aspect of cosmic truth, a puzzle piece in the larger picture Willem was trying to assemble. Third, there was experimentation. And here we come to the darkest aspect of Willem's methodology, the place where his noble pursuit of knowledge crossed into moral ambiguity. What experiments did Willem authorize or conduct in his quest to line brains with eyes? We know about Rom, transformed from human scholar into something else entirely. But was Rom the first attempt? Were there failures before her? Scholars who volunteered? Or were volunteered for transformation and did not survive the process, or emerged as something even more horrifying than Rom became? The game shows us the research hall's patience, though these are primarily the Healing Church's experiments, rather than Byrgenwerth's. But the methodology, the willingness to use human subjects in pursuit of ascension, this traces back to Willem's example. He was willing to transform his students, to reshape human consciousness and biology, to pursue knowledge at costs that perhaps no one should be willing to pay. Fourth, there was the collection and study of the umbilical cords. Every infant Great One possesses one of these cords, and they appear to be the key to achieving the kind of perception that Willem sought. The cord from the Orphan of Kos, obtained during the Fishing Hamlet massacre, was clearly meant to serve Willem's research. These cords are described as being necessary for humanity to match the greatness of the Great Ones. But how, precisely, were they meant to be used? Were they meant to be consumed? Surgically implanted? Used in ritual? The game does not tell us explicitly, but we know that consuming 3 1/3 cords allows the hunter to resist the moon presence and potentially transcend into an infant Great One themselves. This suggests that Willem may have been on the right track, that these biological artifacts from the Great Ones do indeed hold the key to transformation and ascension. Willem's research notes, scattered throughout Byrgenwerth, reveal the evolution of his thinking. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared, reads one note, suggesting that Willem came to believe some truths were too dangerous for general knowledge. This represents a shift from the earlier Willem who sought to elevate all of humanity. By the time he hid Rom in the lake and concealed the rituals she protected, Willem had apparently concluded that universal enlightenment might not be possible or desirable. Perhaps not everyone could handle the truth. Perhaps seeing too much would destroy those unprepared for cosmic reality. This realization may have driven his increasing isolation, his withdrawal from the wider world, his acceptance that Byrgenwerth would become forgotten and forbidden. Another note states, "When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the Great Ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child." This observation about the relationship between the blood moon, transformation, and the Great One's interest in human procreation shows Willem's careful study of the patterns governing these cosmic entities. He was mapping out the rules of reality at a level most humans never even realized existed, understanding when and how the Great Ones descended, what triggered their interest in humanity, what they sought from or through human vessels. These insights were crucial to Willem's larger project of elevating humanity to their level. If you understand the principles by which gods operate, perhaps you can learn to operate by those principles yourself. Willem's epiphany that we are thinking on the basest of planes, what we need are more eyes, represents the culmination of all this research. It is the moment when theory crystallized into a clear path forward. Humans think with human brains processing human perceptions. To think as the Great Ones think, humans need to perceive as the Great Ones perceive. And the Great Ones see with more than 2 eyes, perceive across more dimensions than the 3 or 4 accessible to ordinary human consciousness. Therefore, humans need more eyes, not metaphorical eyes. Though the concept has metaphorical resonance, actual eyes, somehow integrated into the brain, expanding the sensory and cognitive apparatus beyond its current limitations. This is what the umbilical cords offered, eyes already adapted to cosmic perception, ready to be lined into human consciousness. The question of whether Willem's methodology was sound remains open to interpretation. On one hand, he achieved results. Rom exists as proof that human consciousness can be expanded to perceive higher truths. Willem himself seems to have undergone some form of transformation that extended his lifespan far beyond normal human limits, and changed his physiology in ways that suggest communion with higher beings. The runes that Caryll transcribed work exactly as described, granting tangible benefits to those who learn them. The insights about the Great Ones that Willem uncovered have proven accurate wherever we can verify them. His warnings about the old blood were tragically vindicated by the scourge of beasts. In these respects, Willem's scientific approach to the supernatural succeeded where faith-based approaches failed. He uncovered truths achieved results, made real progress toward the goal of human ascension. On the other hand, the costs of his methodology were catastrophic. The Fishing Hamlet massacre, undertaken to obtain research materials, was genocide. Rom achieved ascension, but lost everything that made her human in the process. Willem himself ended up isolated, unable to communicate, trapped in a dying institution, watching over secrets that may not have been worth the price paid to obtain them. The knowledge he uncovered did not lead to human flourishing, but to suffering, transformation, madness. His students either abandoned him to pursue even more destructive paths, or stayed and presumably shared his isolation and decline. Byrgenwerth, the beacon of learning, became forbidden ground, its teachings suppressed or forgotten. If this is success, it is success of a particularly hollow kind. Perhaps the tragedy of Willem's methodology is that it was fundamentally correct in its approach, but applied to a domain where success and failure become meaningless categories. The great ones exist on a level of reality where human values do not apply. To understand them requires abandoning human perspective. But abandoning human perspective means ceasing to care about human outcomes. Willem sought to elevate humanity to the level of gods, but what he discovered was that gods are not elevated humans. They are something else entirely, something alien, something that does not and cannot care about the things humans care about. His methodology was scientifically sound, but the object of study was something that defies scientific understanding, because it operates according to rules that transcend logic and reason as humans understand these concepts. He tried to map the unmappable, to comprehend the incomprehensible, and in doing so, he achieved a kind of understanding that provided no comfort and offered no path to the salvation he sought for humanity. Gehrman, the first hunter, also maintains a connection to Willem, despite siding with Laurence in the schism. When Gehrman sleeps in the hunter's dream, tormented by nightmares, he sometimes calls out to both Laurence and Master Willem, pleading for them to help him awaken. Master Willem, Laurence, somebody help me, unshackle me please. Anybody? I've had enough of this dream. This desperate prayer reveals that even in his current state, trapped in service to the moon presence, bound to the hunter's dream, Gehrman still thinks of Willem as someone who might save him, might possess the knowledge or power to break the curse that binds him. Whether Willem could help if he chose to, or whether Gehrman's plea is simply the desperate hope of a tormented soul, we do not know. But it shows that Willem's influence touched even those who abandoned his teachings, that his reputation as a seeker of truth and understanding endured. The relationships between Willem and his students form a crucial part of understanding his story and the broader tragedy of Bloodborne's world. Each of his major students took something different from his teachings, interpreted them through their own perspectives and goals, and ultimately pursued paths that diverged from what Willem intended. Yet in diverging from him, they demonstrated the power of his ideas even as they twisted or abandoned the core of his philosophy. Examining these relationships reveals both the strength of Willem's influence and the limitations of his ability to guide those he taught toward the outcomes he envisioned. Laurence was, by all indications, Willem's closest student and perhaps the one in whom he invested the most hope. The flashback scene we witness when touching Laurence's skull suggests a deep personal relationship between teacher and pupil. Willem does not simply disagree with Laurence's departure. He feels betrayed by it. The personal nature of this betrayal speaks to a bond that went beyond mere academic association. Willem had taught Laurence everything, had shared his deepest insights, had trusted him to understand the danger of the old blood, and Laurence had understood. He promises not to forget the adage, recites it alongside Willem, demonstrates that he comprehends the warning his master has given him. But understanding is not the same as heeding. Laurence chooses to ignore what he knows, to believe that he can control what Willem fears, to proceed despite the warnings. This makes Laurence's transformation into the first cleric beast all the more tragic from Willem's perspective. It was not ignorance that doomed Laurence, but hubris. The belief that he could succeed where others might fail, that he could harness the power of the old blood without suffering its curse. Willem must have known, sitting in his rocking chair decades or centuries later, that Laurence had fallen to the very fate he had been warned against. The founding of the healing church, the spread of blood ministration throughout Yharnam, the scourge of beasts that consumed the city. All of this traces back to Laurence's decision to ignore his master's teaching. And yet, the Healing Church never completely abandoned Willem's philosophy. They incorporated elements of his teachings about eyes and insight into their own practices. The choir pursued communion with the Great Ones, using methods that echo Willem's approach. They preserved the password, maintained the connection to Byrgenwerth, even as they built their own institution in opposition to its founder's warnings. This suggests that Laurence and his successors recognized the value in Willem's work, even as they rejected his conclusions about blood. The relationship between Willem and Laurence raises questions about mentorship and responsibility. To what extent was Willem responsible for Laurence's actions? He taught Laurence the principles of research, the importance of pursuing knowledge, the possibility of human ascension. He showed Laurence the old blood, explained its properties, demonstrated its power. In some ways, Laurence was simply taking Willem's own methodology and applying it in a different direction. Where Willem said, "Fear the blood and pursue insight," Laurence said, "I hear your warning, but I believe I can use the blood safely to achieve the same goals you seek through other means." This was not total rejection of Willem's teachings, but a modification, an attempt to synthesize different paths to ascension. That it failed catastrophically does not change the fact that Laurence was, in his own mind, continuing, rather than betraying Willem's work. Understanding this nuance helps explain why Willem felt betrayed, rather than simply disappointed. Laurence was not an outsider who never understood. He was an insider who understood perfectly and chose a different path anyway. Gehrman's relationship with Willem appears to have been different in nature from Laurence's. Gehrman was not primarily a scholar, but a warrior, a hunter, someone whose skills lay in physical combat rather than academic research. Yet he was associated with Byrgenwerth, worked alongside its scholars, participated in expeditions like the one to the Fishing Hamlet. His role seems to have been as a protector and facilitator, someone who enabled the scholars' work by handling the dangers they could not handle themselves. When Byrgenwerth sent expeditions into the Prothomarian labyrinths, someone needed to fight the horrors lurking there. When they traveled to the Fishing Hamlet, someone needed to lead the assault that gave scholars access to Kos's corpse. Gehrman filled that role, and in doing so, became complicit in Byrgenwerth's darkest deeds. Gehrman's plea for Willem to help him awaken from his dream is particularly poignant because it suggests he sees Willem as a potential savior, someone who might possess knowledge that could free him from his service to the Moon Presence. This belief may not be entirely unfounded. Willem studied the Great Ones, sought to understand the principles governing their interactions with humanity. If anyone might know how to break a contract with such an entity, it would be Willem. But Willem offers no help, either because he cannot or because he chooses not to. He sits on his balcony, points at the lake, and allows Gehrman to suffer in the dream, just as he suffers in his isolation at Byrgenwerth. This parallel between their situations, both trapped, both unable to escape the consequences of their involvement with the pursuit of ascension, suggests that they share a bond of mutual suffering, even if they cannot or will not help each other escape it. The cut content that hints at Gehrman doing something Willem considered a betrayal adds another layer to their relationship. If this betrayal involved the Fishing Hamlet, then Gehrman's guilt over his actions there, and his desperate desire to be freed from the dream, might be connected to his failure to live up to Willem's expectations. Perhaps Willem expected Gehrman to refuse to participate in the massacre, to protect the scholars from their own worst impulses rather than enabling them. Perhaps Gehrman's joining Laurence in founding the Healing Church was the betrayal, another trusted associate, choosing blood over insight. We can only speculate, but the suggestion of betrayal implies that Willem's isolation was not merely a result of Laurence's departure, but of multiple people he trusted, choosing paths he could not approve. Lady Maria's connection to Willem is less direct, but no less significant. As Gehrman's apprentice and a member of Cainhurst nobility, Maria was somewhat outside the core Byrgenwerth structure, yet she participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, fought alongside the scholars, and witnessed firsthand the consequences of their quest for knowledge. Her subsequent rejection of hunting, her abandonment of her beloved Rakuyo in the dark well, her apparent suicide and imprisonment in the nightmare to guard the research hall's secrets, All of this suggests deep trauma related to what she did in service to Byrgenwerth's research goals. Maria's story represents the human cost of Willem's pursuit of knowledge, from the perspective of someone who was not fully invested in the ideology driving that pursuit. She was a skilled warrior who did what she was told needed to be done, and then had to live with the consequences of those actions. In The Hunter's Nightmare, Maria guards the path to the research hall and the fishing hamlet beyond, protecting the secrets of what was done there, or perhaps ensuring that those who would proceed understand the weight of the history they are entering. Her position as guardian of these spaces suggests a complex relationship with the knowledge and actions she was party to. She cannot undo what was done, cannot bring back the slaughtered villagers, cannot restore Kos or prevent the curse, but she can bear witness, can stand as a memorial to the cost of these actions, can make sure that anyone who follows this path understands what it truly means to pursue forbidden knowledge at any cost. Michaelash represents yet another interpretation of Willem's teachings. As host of the Nightmare and leader of the School of Mensis, Michaelash took Willem's fascination with the Great Ones and pursued it to even more extreme conclusions. Where Willem sought to achieve insight through careful study and gradual elevation of consciousness, Michaelash attempted to force contact with the Great Ones through the Mensis ritual. He begged Kos to grant him eyes as she had granted Rom, sought to commune with Murgo, trapped himself in a nightmare realm in his pursuit of cosmic truth. Michaelash's madness, his cage-wearing appearance, his obsessive prayer to beings that may or may not hear him, all of this represents what happens when Willem's pursuit of insight is stripped of the restraint and methodology that characterized Willem's own approach. Michaelash understood what Willem was trying to achieve, but lacked the patience, or perhaps the wisdom to pursue it through Willem's careful, scientific methods. Instead, he threw himself into direct communion with beings that human minds are not equipped to fully comprehend. The result was madness, transformation into something that exists more in nightmare than reality, trapped in an endless loop of seeking contact with the Great Ones while being hunted through labyrinthine halls. If Willem could see what Michaelash became, what he made of the School of Mensis in his obsessive pursuit of eyes and ascension, would he recognize it as a twisted version of his own goals, or would he see it as something so fundamentally different that it bears no resemblance to what he taught? The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals, but Michaelash sought to expose those rituals, to perform them himself, to force the descent of higher beings into the material world. This is the opposite of concealment, the opposite of careful study, the opposite of Willem's ultimate conclusion that some truths need not be shared. These relationships reveal that Willem's influence spread far beyond what he directly taught, that his ideas took on lives of their own in the minds of those who learned from him, that the pursuit of ascension and enlightenment he pioneered led to 1,000 different interpretations and 1,000 different tragedies. Each student took something different from his teachings. Laurence took the idea that humanity could be elevated and decided blood was the key. Gehrman took the understanding that knowledge requires sacrifice and became the instrument of those sacrifices. Maria took the horror of what that sacrifice actually meant and could not bear to continue. Michaelash took the obsession with eyes and higher perception and lost himself entirely in pursuit of it. And Willem himself took his own conclusions, that we need more eyes, that insight is the path, and followed them to an endpoint where he sits transformed and silent, unable to share what he has learned, pointing at a lake that contains both his greatest success and his most obvious failure. The fate of Willem's students tells us something crucial about the nature of knowledge and the transmission of ideas. Willem could teach methodology, could explain principles, could demonstrate through his own example what he believed was the correct path, but he could not control how his students would interpret and apply those teachings. He could not force them to draw the same conclusions he drew, to prioritize the things he prioritized, to fear what he feared. Each person who learned from him filtered his teachings through their own desires, their own understanding, their own circumstances. Laurence wanted to help people immediately, to cure disease and suffering, and so he saw in the old blood a tool for that purpose despite the warnings. Michaelash wanted transcendence, wanted to touch the divine directly, and so he threw caution aside in pursuit of that goal. Gehrman wanted to serve, to be useful, to protect, and so he became the weapon that enabled others' questionable choices. Maria wanted to excel at her craft, to honor her bloodline and her teacher, and so she fought brilliantly, in service to goals she would later find unconscionable. None of them were foolish or evil or blind. They were human, making human choices based on human desires and fears and hopes. And those human responses to Willem's inhuman pursuit of cosmic truth led them all, without exception, to tragedy. Laurence became a beast. Gehrman became trapped in an eternal dream. Maria became a guardian in a nightmare. Michaelash became mad, lost in corridors of his own mind. And Willem became isolated, transformed, unable to communicate with the very students he had taught and lost. The dispersal of his pupils represents the dispersal of his legacy, fragmented, interpreted in contradictory ways, leading not to the unified elevation of humanity he might have envisioned, but to a dozen different disasters, each rooted in some aspect of his teachings, but none fully embodying the wisdom he tried to impart. There are even suggestions in cut content that Gehrman might have done something Willem considered betrayal. Paralleling Laurence's departure, what this betrayal might have been, whether it was participating in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, joining Laurence in founding the Healing Church, or something else entirely, remains speculative, but it adds another layer to Willem's isolation, another student who abandoned him, another relationship marked by disappointment and separation. The password system protecting Byrgenwerth also demonstrates Willem's lasting influence. The adage, "Fear the old blood," serves as the only key to entering the Forbidden Woods and accessing the college. This means that knowledge of Byrgenwerth's teachings, understanding of Willem's central warning, became the requirement for approaching his institution. Only those who comprehended the danger of blood, who understood Willem's philosophy even if they did not fully embrace it, could walk the path to his door. This created a strange situation where the Healing Church, an organization built on blood ministration, still preserved and taught Willem's warning against that very practice. They maintained the password, ensured it was remembered, perhaps as a form of respect for their intellectual origins, or perhaps because they too recognized, on some level, that Willem had been right to fear the blood. When the player speaks the password to the gatekeeper, affirming knowledge of the adage, they gain passage. But this knowledge comes too late to save anyone, too late to prevent the catastrophe that Willem foresaw. By the time hunters arrive at Byrgenwerth's gates, Yharnam is already consumed by the scourge of beasts. The Healing Church's grand experiment has failed catastrophically, and Willem's warning has been vindicated by the destruction of everything Laurence built. The tragedy is that Willem was right. Blood did undo humanity. The promise of healing, of strength, of transcendence through blood ministration led directly to the beastly scourge that consumed Yharnam. People transformed into beasts, losing their humanity, becoming the very monsters they once hunted. The city descended into chaos and violence, consumed by the curse that blood brought. Laurence himself, the first vicar of the Healing Church, fell victim to the scourge and became the first cleric beast, a massive, deformed horror wreathed in inextinguishable flames. His transformation was the ultimate proof of Willem's warning, the beloved student who ignored his master's adage and paid the ultimate price. Willem's vindication brings no joy, however. To be proven right after everyone you warned has already suffered the consequences. To watch the world burn because they did not fear the old blood, as you told them to fear it, this is not triumph, this is tragedy compounded by helplessness. Willem sits in his chair and points at the lake, and all his warnings, all his wisdom, all his fears, proved justified but useless, because no one listened until it was far too late. When the hunter finally reaches Byrgenwerth and climbs to the second floor, they find the lunarium key, which grants access to the balcony where Willem keeps his vigil. The description notes that in his final years, Willem was fond of the lookout and the rocking chair there for meditation, and that in the end, he left his secret with the lake. This secret is Rom, the Vacuous Spider, the proof of his theories and the protector of humanity's ignorance. Approaching Willem, the hunter finds him in his rocking chair, facing the lake. If they attempt to speak with him, he simply points toward the water and occasionally sighs. No words, no explanations, just the gesture and the sound of breath. If the hunter has already defeated Rom, Willem's behavior changes. He no longer points toward the lake, because Rom is no longer there to point at. Instead, he simply sighs, perhaps in relief, perhaps in sorrow, perhaps merely acknowledging the inevitable end of Rom's barrier. Talking to Willem grants the hunter two insight, suggesting that merely being in his presence, observing him and understanding who and what he is, expands perception. This is fitting for a man whose entire philosophy centered on increasing insight, on opening eyes to higher truths. Even in his ruined state, Willem still radiates knowledge, still serves as a catalyst for expanded understanding. If the player chooses to kill Willem, he drops the eye rune and Madman's knowledge if they already possess the rune. These items perfectly encapsulate his legacy, the symbol of his life's work, and the price of the knowledge he pursued. Madman's knowledge items are described as fragments of wisdom that drove their previous owners to madness, suggesting that the truths Willem sought came at the cost of sanity. His own state, unable to speak, covered in growths, bleeding silver, supports this interpretation. He achieved understanding, but lost humanity in the process. When struck, Willem does not defend himself. He has no weapon, no ability to fight back. He simply sits there and takes the blows, mouth moving in silent curses, but body offering no resistance. This passivity could indicate acceptance of death, readiness to finally escape his vigil, or it could represent inability to act, his transformation having robbed him of agency along with speech. Either way, his death is not the defeat of a boss, but the mercy killing of someone who has suffered long enough. Yet some players choose never to kill Willem, leaving him in his chair, pointing at the lake, enduring whatever existence he leads. There is something profoundly sad about this choice, condemning him to continue indefinitely, but it also respects his right to persist, to maintain his watch over what he created for as long as he deems necessary. The relationship between Willem and Rom in the endgame raises final questions about his intentions and his understanding of what must happen. He points hunters toward Rom, directing them to fight and kill her. Why? Rom creates the barrier that hides the blood moon and conceals the amygdala, and keeps certain eldritch truths from manifesting. By directing hunters to destroy Rom, Willem facilitates the collapse of that barrier, allows the nightmare to become more visible, permits the truth to be revealed. Does he believe this is necessary? That humanity must face the truth, regardless of consequences? Or has he simply recognized that Rom's barrier cannot hold forever, that the blood moon will descend eventually, and it is better to destroy Rom on human terms than to wait for the barrier to fail on its own? Perhaps Willem has waited all these years for a hunter strong enough to defeat Rom, someone capable of piercing the veil and confronting what lies beyond. The hunter who reaches Byrgenwerth, who speaks the adage and climbs to the lunarium, represents the culmination of Willem's long vigil. This hunter is the instrument through which Willem's vision will finally reach its conclusion. For better or worse, when Rom dies, when the barrier falls and the blood moon descends, the world changes irrevocably. The amygdala become visible to those with sufficient insight, clinging to buildings and bridges, cosmic horrors that were always there but hidden. The hunt intensifies, the nightmare becomes more oppressive, and the true scope of Yharnam's corruption becomes apparent. This revelation aligns with Willem's philosophy. He believed in opening eyes, in seeing truth even when that truth is horrifying. Rom's barrier was a kindness to humanity, protecting them from knowledge they could not handle. Willem sends hunters to destroy that kindness, to force humanity to confront cosmic reality. Is this cruel or necessary? Is it better to live in comfortable ignorance, or die with eyes open? Willem seems to have decided that truth, however terrible, is preferable to the protected ignorance Rom maintained. His entire life's work built toward this moment, toward humanity developing the capacity to perceive higher planes, even if that perception brings no comfort. In this sense, Willem succeeds. The hunter gains insight, sees the amygdala, comprehends the presence of the Great Ones in ways ordinary humans cannot. They progress beyond Rom's barrier into awareness of the nightmare's true nature. But this success comes after everything Willem tried to prevent through his warnings has already occurred. Yharnam is consumed by beasts. The Healing Church's experiments have created horrors. Laurence became a monster, and the world is fundamentally broken. Opening eyes to this reality does not fix it, merely reveals the full extent of the damage. Willem's story is ultimately one of isolation and vindication, of being right in ways that brought no victory. He saw the danger of the old blood and warned against it. His students ignored him and built a church on blood ministration. He pursued insight and the aligning of brains with eyes. He succeeded with Rom, but at the cost of her humanity. He sought to elevate mankind to the plane of the gods. He may have achieved this for himself, but became trapped in a ruined college, transformed beyond humanity, unable to communicate what he learned. Every goal he pursued came with a cost that may have exceeded its value. Every warning he gave was proven accurate, but ignored until after catastrophe. He spent decades or centuries alone, watching over a lake that contained both his greatest success and his greatest failure, waiting for a hunter who would complete the cycle by destroying the barrier he helped create. There is debate among those who study Bloodborne's lore about whether Willem should be considered a tragic hero or a cautionary tale. On one hand, his pursuit of knowledge was noble. He sought truth, understanding, enlightenment for all humanity. He warned against the dangers of the blood and was proven right. He never wavered from his conviction that insight, not blood, was the path to ascension. On the other hand, his pursuit led to the Fishing Hamlet massacre, to experiments on Rom that stripped her of humanity, to a philosophy so focused on ascending to higher planes that it may have lost sight of the value of human experience and human life. His warnings went unheeded, partly because he could not or would not compromise, could not find a middle ground with Laurence that might have prevented the worst excesses of blood ministration. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes. Willem was neither purely noble nor purely reckless. He was a scholar driven by genuine desire to elevate humanity, but willing to pay terrible costs in pursuit of that goal. He was a teacher who inspired great loyalty and great betrayal. He was a philosopher whose ideas shaped the world, but whose warnings were ignored until they were proven by catastrophe. He achieved what he sought, but may have discovered that the achievement was not what he expected, that seeing as the great ones see does not bring the satisfaction or understanding one might hope for. In the end, Willem's legacy is complex and contradictory, like the man himself. His warning, "Fear the old blood," became the central truth of Bloodborne's world, the adage that should have been heeded but was not. His pursuit of eyes, of insight, of elevated perception, became the goal that both the choir and individual hunters pursue, driving much of the game's progression. His creation of, or involvement with Rom gave humanity temporary protection from cosmic truth, but also created the barrier that must be destroyed for the hunt to progress. His transformation from renowned provost to silent, transformed figure on a balcony represents the cost of seeking knowledge beyond human understanding. When we encounter Willem in his rocking chair, we are not meeting a villain or a hero. We are meeting a man at the end of a very long road, someone who made choices that seemed right at the time but led to unexpected places, someone who saw his warnings proven true after everyone he warned had already paid the price for not listening. He points at the lake, at Rom, at the culmination of his life's work, and that gesture, that simple act of pointing, contains everything he has left to communicate. Go there, defeat her, see what lies beneath. Open your eyes, as I told you to do, as I always told you to do, and face the truth, even though it will bring you no comfort. Perhaps the saddest aspect of Willem's story is that he was fundamentally right about almost everything. The old blood did undo humanity. Ascension through blood did lead to beastly transformation. The pursuit of eyes, of insight, was a more stable path than blood ministration, even if it came with its own terrible costs. Had Yharnam followed Willem's teachings rather than Laurence's, had they pursued insight through runes and study, rather than power through blood, the city might still stand, might have avoided the scourge of beasts entirely. But this alternate history is pure speculation. We can never know if Willem's path would have succeeded because it was never fully attempted on the scale that Laurence's was. The healing church had the power, the resources, the institutional support to implement blood ministration across an entire city. Byrgenwerth, isolated and forgotten, never had that opportunity. Willem's philosophy remained theoretical, pursued by a few scholars in a hidden college, while Laurence's vision reshaped civilization. So we are left with what-ifs and might-have-beens, with a quiet old man in a rocking chair, who may or may not have all the answers we seek. Willem represents paths not taken, warnings not heeded, wisdom that came too late to save anyone. He is proof that being right is not the same as being victorious, that having the truth on your side does not mean you will prevail, that sometimes the prophet in the wilderness is ignored until the flood has already come and drowned everyone who did not listen. In the grand cathedral of the healing church, Vicar Amelia prays to Laurence's skull, seeking guidance from the founder of her faith. In Byrgenwerth, Willem points at Rom, directing hunters toward his own creation. Both institutions, both philosophies, both approaches to elevating humanity ultimately fail to prevent catastrophe. The healing church creates the scourge of beasts. Byrgenwerth creates a barrier that must be destroyed. Neither path leads to salvation, merely to different forms of understanding about why salvation was impossible. If we seek a moral to Willem's story, it might be this: the pursuit of knowledge, no matter how noble, no matter how well-intentioned, comes with costs that must be carefully weighed. Opening eyes to truth can be valuable, but what if the truth is that humanity was better off blind? Ascending to higher planes of perception sounds glorious, but what if those planes offer only horror and alienation? Warning others of danger is important, but if they will not listen, what then? Willem devoted his life to these questions and found answers that brought him little comfort. He succeeded in his goals and was left sitting alone in a ruined college, transformed beyond humanity, unable to share what he learned. Whether we consider this success or failure depends on what we value: the truth at any cost or the preservation of human experience and connection. Willem chose truth. He opened his eyes, lined his brain with eyes, pursued insight to its ultimate conclusion. And now he sits in silence, pointing at a lake, waiting for hunters to complete what he started, to destroy the final barrier between humanity and cosmic truth. When you defeat Rom and the blood moon descends, when the amygdala become visible and the nightmare intensifies, remember that this was Willem's vision all along. He wanted humanity to see, to perceive the great ones, and the true nature of reality. He believed this was necessary for ascension, for evolution, for matching the greatness of higher beings. Whether he was right, whether opening humanity's eyes to this particular truth was worth the cost, is a question each hunter must answer for themselves. But as you stand in the transformed world, seeing what was always there but hidden, know that Willem anticipated this moment decades or centuries ago, that everything you experience now was the logical conclusion of his philosophy and his warnings, that the old man in the rocking chair made this possible through his pursuit of knowledge that perhaps should have remained secret. Master Willem, Provost of Byrgenwerth, seeker of eyes, believer in insight over blood, prophet of truths no one wanted to hear. His story is the story of Bloodborne itself, the pursuit of transcendence through terrible means, the opening of eyes to horrors beyond comprehension, the price paid for knowledge that cannot be unlearned. He sits on his balcony, points at the lake, and waits. And when you kill Rom, when the barrier falls, when the truth becomes manifest, you are fulfilling his vision, completing his work, proving that he was right all along about what humanity needed, even if it was not what humanity wanted. If you've made it this far into the lore of Master Willem, I hope you found this exploration of one of Bloodborne's most enigmatic figures worthwhile. His story touches on every major theme of the game, connects to almost every significant character and faction, and raises questions about knowledge, transformation, and the costs of pursuing truth that remain relevant long after the hunt has ended. Willem reminds us that sometimes the wisest voice in the room is the one no one listens to, until it is far too late, that vindication is cold comfort, when everyone you tried to warn has already suffered, and that seeing the truth does not always set you free, but might instead trap you in understanding you wish you could escape. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complete story of Master Willem. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Bloodborne's lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations of the rich narratives hidden within our favorite games. Until next time, Fear the old blood, and keep your eyes open to the truths that surround us, even when those truths are difficult to bear. Lady Maria's connection to Willem is less direct, but no less significant. As Gehrman's apprentice and a member of Cainhurst nobility, Maria was somewhat outside the core Byrgenwerth structure, yet she participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, fought alongside the scholars, and witnessed firsthand the consequences of their quest for knowledge. Her subsequent rejection of hunting, her abandonment of her beloved Rakuyo in the dark well, her apparent suicide and imprisonment in the nightmare to guard the research hall's secrets. All of this suggests deep trauma related to what she did in service to Byrgenwerth's research goals. Maria's story represents the human cost of Willem's pursuit of knowledge, from the perspective of someone who was not fully invested in the ideology driving that pursuit.